All right, welcome everyone to the 116th edition of the Ops Area Working Group and Joint Ops Area Meeting. We are your hosts. I'm Joe Clark, Chenren Ju, and Henk Burkholz. We're up here at the chairs. We have got one heck of an agenda today, so let's just get right into it. This is an IETF meeting. As such, it is covered by the Note Well, which governs all of your contributions and participation here at the meeting. One thing to pay particular attention to is we are a respective organization and respectful. So be sure that you treat others with respect. Give them the time that you would expect to receive as you make your contributions. And there is all the information that you will need to understand the Note Well and participate. You may also notice a QR code up there on the screen. I see Alex taking a picture of it. Those are our virtual blue sheets, so definitely be sure to use that to be in the meeting. Speaking of being in the meeting, we will queue to the mic using the Meet Echo queuing tool. So if you go to the agenda page off of the IETF.org 116 page, you'll see the ability to launch either the mobile or the full meeting participation. So before you join the queue, either virtually or in person, please be sure to virtually raise your hand. And that way we all stand in the same line. We also have virtual transcription service going on. It's been pointed out it's not perfect, but it is great to have something helping us out. Henk and Rob have also agreed to do some minute taking for us. So we will have our usual action item list and things of that nature. In terms of the agenda, we did post it. We are over time. There were 3 presentations by, I know Luis and Chin in particular. There was one other. We will almost certainly not have time for those presentations. However, Benoit gave us some time back, so we'll go as quickly as we can through things. We will use the timer, but just be aware that we have more presentations than we have time for. This is us. We've already gone through some of this. We are using Zulip as well. You can launch that off of the meeting page to do the chat, and we'll be monitoring that here in the tool. In terms of our updates, real quick, no new RFCs published, but we have a lot in the queue, and Rob has been diligently working through many of those in terms of the things that are in the RFC editor queue, as well as the things that are now in the IESG's lap for publication. We did get an update to the TACX Plus TLS draft, and I thank the authors and reviewers like Alan who have gone through that. I would ask that more people review that. This was one of the things that prompted us to do the informational TACX Plus draft in the first place, so that we could get some real security around TACX. And we have one document in adoption call, that is the DM-LMO draft. So please be sure to read that and reply on list. Any other updates, gentlemen? All right, with that, let us get right into the agenda. You've just heard some administrivia. I'm just going to click through here. You can see where we are. These last 3, Qifeng, Luis, and Chongfeng, almost certainly, I'm sorry, we probably won't have time. We do have some ops area items to discuss. Any bashing of this agenda before I hand things over to Thomas? Great. Thomas, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks a lot. Good. So this is the on-pass delay in IPFix. Next slide, please. So since we are since adoption, we did some minor changes on the draft. So we extended the introduction section to have also the terminology from the performance registry. we corrected some small nits, increased the IPFix entity data type size based on tests we did in real-life implementations, adjusted some of the data type semantics, also described in the operational consideration section how reduced size encoding is applicable. And according to Greg's input, we were detailing the already existing IOM application section just to make sure that there is no ambiguity there. We removed, there's also something from the deployments we have in our lab that we removed the nanosecond granularity because we saw that it's not very feasible. Microseconds is good enough to cover all of the use cases. And we had on the IETF hackathon 3 implementation, which I will describe in the later slide. And we documented that in the implementation status section. Next slide, please. So this was one of 2 topologies we were running in the lab. So these are 2 vendors, Cisco and Huawei. While both vendors implemented the SRv6 draft, which is now at ISG, and Huawei implemented the on-pass delay measurement, and we had 2 SRv6 traffic engineered paths, while one path is crossing a link which has artificially high delay. And we had the PMACCT data collection, basically calculating the mean delta microseconds based on the delay sum delta microseconds by dividing that from the packet delta count. And on another topology, based on VPP, we had an implementation using IOM trace type option. Next slide, please. So this is just a screenshot showing some results. So on the top left side, you see basically from the SRH header 2 different SID lists. So you can see from a data plane perspective when we did the failover to the second path. While on number 2, you see basically the delay grouped by node. So as soon as basically we are switching the path to at the end to another node, you see the increased delay there. And on number 3, you're seeing basically since the failover is triggered by the BGP overlay, it's a layer 3 VPN, we were using BMP route monitoring to make that visible. On the right-hand side, we were also using some anomaly detection, so basically using that kind of operational metrics and showing the use case that actually the verification of such topology changes and how it's affecting the overall delay can be automated. Next slide, please. So, so that's the current status. So we have 2 network vendor implementation, 1 data collection implementation, and we are planning for the next draft version also to add some examples for the data record and the data templates. Any questions or comments would be highly appreciated. Thanks.
Thanks, Thomas. I also just love the fact that you're working on implementations. So I think it's great to see operators bring the problems and work in the hackathon on implementation. So appreciate that.
Cool. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Med.
Yeah, okay, so the this is to give the I would say the update of the work we have done with Benoit and also Thierry on the review of the IPFX registry. So next slide, please. So last time when I presented the I would say the draft about the TCP flags, I thought that I have only one I would say draft and one exercise to do. But when I come home, I have to do I would say a full homework on the registry. So next slide, please. There was, I would say, one issue that we reported on TCP staff, but when we sit down with Benoit, we figure out that there is, I would say, more than that in the registry. So if we want to have something that is really cleaner, and I would say fix a lot of issues that we have in the registry, we have to do more effort. So we agreed on, I would say, on a plan to how to proceed. Something that can be really pragmatic and not to I would say to boil the ocean there. So the plan that we proposed to the working group and that was relayed by Joe during the call for adoption for the RFC 71-2025 is to progress that update separately as it has not an existing RFC, and in the meantime to edit a second draft that will clean up, I would say, the registry with a really very I would say focus. The focus will be mainly on, I would say, fixing small stuff and not, I would say, defining new information elements. And if it happens that we figure out that there is a need to define new information elements, the plan was to move them to separate documents. And the third one, and this is that to see that the simple fixes may or may not be, I would say, published as an RFC. And to be honest with you, I wanted to park that document as soon as I publish it, and then I will give you the update on that. Next slide, please. So when we started to I would say, to implement that plan, so the RFC update on the 71-2025, so it was adopted since there. We, I would say, integrated the command that we received from the working group. And also we have implemented, I would say, the resolution from the two issues that we raised here in the last IETF meeting. So we go for a BIS document rather than update, and this document is really ready for the working of last call. And we also edited a second document. This is the what we call the simple fixes. This is fixing the description we have in the mini information elements. Fixing the pointers point to existing ANR, I would say, registry when really there is one. So we avoid having, I would say, fixed and really stale or registry at the IPFX side, and many other commands that we received from the designated experts that were really responsive in the in review on this document. Next slide, please. And among of the issues that we found in these simple fixes, there are two ones that are really critical. The one about the IPv6 extension headers and the other one about the TCP options. So in one of the internal version we have with Benoit, we played with a design that tried to reuse the existing ones. But we figured out that it doesn't work given the limitation that we have already in the IPv6 specification that does not make an assumption about the order of the information elements. So we went for, I would say, new information elements to that will, I would say, with new code points for these two elements. Basically, the issue is that we are not covering the full, I would say, range of the TCP options and the extension headers, and also there is no link between the view that has IPv6 on this TCP option and the IPv6 extension headers, and what is really assigned by the working groups who are working on this topic. And the third document, which is really a bonus, this is something what we worked with Thierry. This is to provide, I would say, the protocol parity for the UDP. As you know, or you may know, UDP also has options, and this is a working group document which has started to be done in TSV since many years now. And it is in the working group last in TSV, so it provides you to place some, I would say, information in the UDP, not in the header stuff, but in the trailer. And we designed the options that will mimic what we have in the TCP options. So the same design will be leveraged for UDP option as well. Next slide, please. So in the second slide, I mentioned that for the simple fixes, the plan I had in mind is just to, once I have this ready, give it to the designated expert. We have a reference for the changes, and we are done. But unfortunately, we cannot do that, and we will be obliged if we want to fix these problems we have in the IP registry, because many of these information elements were set by the IETF consensus. We need to modify them via the IETF consensus itself. So we need to publish this document as well. So next slide, please. So the current status is as follows. The RFC, the update for the RFC 7125 is really ready for the working group last call. So I would like, if the working group can just issue that one, and to request the adoption for the full set of the IDs, the simple fixes, the IPv6 extension header, TCP option, and for the DP options. Just as a note for this, for the last two documents, we may just merge them. But for logistic matters, because I don't want that the TCP option and the extension header to be stale because of the normative dependency of the work which is done in TSV working group, I prefer to separate them so that we are really, I would say, sure that there is no delay for publishing the TCP option and the V6 extension headers. And I am done for the report on this work. And I don't know if Benoit has any further comments to mention.
We have two in the queue. Thomas.
Thomas Graf from Swisscom. First of all, thanks a lot for this work. I think this is really, really helpful. I have just one comment on the IPv6 extension header. So if I understood correctly, like we have currently and also in your proposal, the limitation that basically for each extension header type, so there can be only one occurrence. So if you're addressing this in a new element, IPv6 element, it would be good to consider that we can support multiple types in a packet.
Yeah,
thanks.
Just in the comment on the list so that so that I can remember it and take it into account when
we'll do that.
Yeah,
thanks.
So just as you are talking about the IPv6 extension headers. Actually, we fixed some issues with the existing information elements in the simple fixes. So basically, to define a new registry, because we don't have anyone so far, and register, we have done the checks with the diff between what we have in the IPv6 and what is we currently assigned by the 6-mile work group for the extension header. So we have the request for this. So this will be cleaned for the existing ones. But for the new ones, we'll reuse the same registry, but just that play with some encoding there so that we can cover the full range when there will be new ones that will come in. Yeah, perfect. But your point is taken, and we'll take that into account.
Thanks a lot.
And and it's not another command. This is not only specific to this one, because also for the TCP options, and for the other object that you have in the IPv6 registry, you may have a value having the occurrence of an object in the IPv6 itself. But so I will just need to discuss with Benoit how we'll cover this one, whether specifically for the TCP option, for the extension header itself, or to be common to other extension information elements there. Yeah.
So Rob Watson, Cisco, it's great you're doing this and sort of the cleaning up of the registries and things. That's great. I understand that the process is slightly harder because of how it's sort of set up and things. So my comments really to the working group. I think the cases where we have stuff like this, we're just trying to sort of fix things and get things going. Let's try and not put too much process in there. Let's get these things these documents adopted and move through relatively quickly is my desire.
Yeah, thank you.
I think Benoit, you're out. No, you moved yourself. Okay. So I did see your request for the working group last call. Makes sense. And it seems like that there is, as Rob mentioned, there is desire to not only fix this from a overall IETF standpoint, but interest in the working group. So we will raise it on the list when we get back from Yokohama.
Okay, thank you.
And thanks for giving time back. Next up, we have Chaitanya. Pronounce that right? Do we have a speaker?
Here's the remote.
I don't see anyone remote. See if we have any of the speakers. Shoot. Yeah. I guess we will defer. Last chance speaker on this, on IP flow information exports? No? Okay. Benoit, I think you're next then. What's that? Ah, Jean. All right. Jean, you are on manifest. Where is it? Seeing a lot of. Ah, here it is. Sorry about that.
Hello. So I'm Jean. I will be presenting this draft on behalf of the authors. So next slide, please. So quickly to recall the context, what we want to do is to be able to have a characterization of how the data that we have has been collected. And there are many reasons for that, but mainly the idea is to be able to understand if there is some holes in a time series in a database, why it's there, for instance. This is the kind of example that we want to be able to do. So next slide, please. So this is the very simple example. I have a counter and a status. And if I don't have any update on the counter or on the status, is it because the counter did not move? Is it because there was a problem in the collection? Is it actually normal because it's unchanged? So this is the kind of question that we want to be able to answer with this draft. So next slide, please. So the idea was to propose the data manifest in two parts. One part which is the platform manifest, which is about the platform. So the idea is that depending on the platform, you might have specific bugs. So you want to characterize completely the platform that you have in order that later you can go back and say, oh yes, in that version there was this bug. So you can have all the information that you need. And then the data collection, which is more specific to young push subscription actually, where you can have the information about that subscription in particular, like how was it configured and how was it performing. And so basically the idea is that these two manifests you must be able, when you have some data in your database at the end, you must be able to link back to the original data manifest. Next slide, please. So we did some changes in the introduction since the last iteration. And mainly the thing that are important is that we propose some use case. One very important use case is of course, the data mesh principle, which means that you're not just giving some data, you're proposing some data and you are explaining what this data means. So it means you need to preserve the semantics, you need to explain how they were collected and so on. And you need to export that in a way that your users can actually use the data that you're proposing. So this is to enable this, that we do this draft. And also we want to clarify that the goal of this draft is to be able to store data outside of the device. So it's not really a device model. It's something that we want to be able to store independently. In that sense, it's more like a network model. And it could be that in a transition period, if it's not supported by the device, it's okay. Maybe it could be always supported by the collector, but it would be much simpler from a collector point of view if the device could export this manifest directly. But still, the manifest would be like kind of a network model. So next slide, please. So this is the change that we did in order to make that clear. We did the change in the model actually. So now instead of having a platform manifest that is just one model on the device, we made it clear by adding an index on the platform and each platform being identified by an ID. Of course, when we add an ID, it means that we need to, again, have some kind of inventory where this ID is taken from. So our suggestion for that is to reuse the sysname, but it's more like a suggestion. I don't think we want to enforce that. Ideally, this platform ID should be managed by the person, I mean the operator, because they will have a way to identify their own platform. So this is this is the part that so we have this ID. So another change, it was suggested by Med, is to add the personal enterprise number. I don't know if it's personal, but yeah, the pen. Then we removed the dependency on the Yang packages, at least temporarily, because that was causing some errors. And we added the list of streams because this is necessary for Yang push or the RFC 8639. So we need to have this, and this is actually a property of the platform, so we put it in the platform manifest. I see Venkata.
I think Venkat was in the queue for the next presentation, so that was
okay.
trying to. But Venkata, do you have any question on this?
Presentation.
Okay. Next slide, please. Then. So for the data collection manifest, we did the same change as the other one, which is we added the platform ID as an index. So now it's a network view as well. And it has some references to the platform model, of course, the platform ID. So the stream, which is needed for RFC 8639, and the data store, which is needed for RFC 8641. And so we switched from some kind of MDT generic model to actually reusing the Yang push model. So so we have the same notion of subscription and the same parameters. And the only additional field is the current period, which is telling us for periodic subscription if the current period at which we are sending updates is the same as the one that was subscribed. Sometimes some device might decide that because they are overloaded, they cannot honor the proposed subscription, so they will take a larger period, but still send the updates. Okay, next slide, please. So we have some improvements, and actually Diego gave me some insight on this, but it's not in the draft yet, but it will be very soon, about data integrity. So we have some open questions. So we have a technical Yang problem, which is that when we update, when we want to reuse the Yang models, it's very hard to, well, we can import the model, of course, but then we can only include the groupings. And if you have a relief ref in the grouping or something like that, and you, for instance, you switch from a device model to a network model, there is a good chance that your leaf refs will not be working anymore. So I don't know if you have any kind of idea on how to solve this problem, or if it's kind of okay to do a copy paste of the model and redo the same but network level instead of device level. Sorry?
Can you use a schema mount?
So schema mount, the RFC that I've seen, I think there is only one. It's at runtime. It's not at design time. Here, we would really like to have this at design time. So, okay. So, yes, Rob.
So one of the things that Yang packages was looking at, I think one of the things where it got sort of stuck last time we were discussing it and hadn't sort of resolved, was trying to do something along the lines of, I don't quite catch design time, but design time schema mount. So certainly the idea of the Yang packages was that you could enable, describe what the possible modules you'll see mounted at particular points. Whether that solves all the issues, I don't know. Certainly, if you wanted to do like leaf refs across modules, you'd have problems, but that is maybe a possibility. Schema mount does add complexity here, whereas what you got is a simpler solution. But just to check, I understand, is the idea that these models are used both on the device and off the device? The network layer, is that the intention? I see that Benoit's nodding his head. I should have said Rob Wilson Cisco as well. Sorry.
Okay. So I think that's all for me. Yes, last slide, just to say, of course, we would like to request for work group adoption, because I think that once we have the next version of the slide, we should be, of the draft, we should be ready. So yeah, that's all for me.
Joe Clark Cisco is a contributor on your platform ID as a string, and you said sysname might be a suggestion. What if I change the name of my device? Is it important to correlate this over time and make sure that it always stays with the device that I'm monitoring? I get a little nervous when I see a lot of strings that feel nebulous and not a lot of guidance. So I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, so that's always the issue. So ideally, we should have some kind of maybe inventory model where we could have a leaf ref, and then it would be okay. It's the name that must exist in the inventory. I mean, maybe that's something that we should try to go for, but I don't see the inventory part being ready yet. So this is I think the first thing. And then regarding whether if the name change, that shouldn't change. Well, actually, yes, because if you say I've got this packet, this telemetry message, and I got it from this device, then you want to be able to go take the name of the device and go look in your database for the platform manifest with that name. And that should be here.
Okay, so I agree on the inventory, and it sounds like maybe there is some work that's going to start being codified on inventory. And without the guidance, though, if I look that name up, I may not know exactly, like one vendor may do it one way, one vendor may do it another way. I would just hope that ultimately, if there isn't something to anchor it to, there's some strong guidance on what this should be. So there's some consistency, so I can look it up and I can tie it to something specific and the same thing over time.
Yeah, well, I think here it's kind of the place where we defined it in the platform manifest, and in the data manifest we have a leaf ref to it. So this is the way we say, okay, we should be able to link the two. This is the way we model it at the moment. Yeah.
Thomas?
Thomas Graf, Swisscom. Maybe just one comment. We have been debating this, and let's say the other option would be at the moment to use actually the IP address which is exposing the metrics from the device. But since a router can have many IP addresses, you know, from where the metrics can be exposed, we thought probably identifying the node by the sysname might be for the moment the best option. But Joe, you have the valid point, how to identify the router.
Oh, from Huawei. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
that's better.
Yeah. Actually, we have been working on that network inventory, and we also noticed there's some work in CCAM work, but they are trying to like solve abstract the device from only from the hardware perspective. So I think this work is going on, and I noticed there are some like platform specific attributes like some software and also the OS tab. I think it's in the inventory, so that can be like reused between and be consistency between these models.
Yeah.
Rob, are you still in queue?
No.
Okay. On just as co-chair, on what you looking for adoption, I think is something we can raise on list as an action. I've seen quite a bit of feedback or discussion about this already.
Very good.
We probably have time for one question. No?
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank
Sean.
you.
Okay, we're going to go back to Venkata on the previous somewhere. Nope, we'll find it. I think this is it. Yep.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe.
Venkata.
Yeah. Can you hear
Okay.
me?
We can.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm Chaitanya, and I'll be presenting updates to the draft on behalf of my fellow co-authors, Shivam, Aditya, and Devang. Next slide, please. So we'll go over a quick recap of what this draft is about. So every network will eventually encounter issues like packet loss from time to time. In a multi-layered network, it is tedial and manual work to localize and root cause traffic black holing issues. So in order to avoid tedious workflow, drop packets may be subject to deep inspection along the forwarding path and sent to a host or a software queue along with the type of exception, the incoming and outgoing interface information, and other relevant metadata. So this can help network operators immediately understand the root cause and can facilitate automation to fix the underlying issues. Now, this proposal was introduced in IETF 109 and was last presented in IETF 110. Some of the IPFX information elements already exist, and this draft defines 4 new information elements for the sake of the same solution. That is the forwarding exception code, the forwarding next hop ID, the forwarding lookup type, and underlying ingress interface. We have addressed quite a few number of comments that we have received during and after IETF 110. Next slide, please. So there was a comment from Thomas suggesting extending the forwarding exception code to include all the categories from information element 89, that is forwarded, dropped, and consumed. And additionally, I think Thomas also asked us to consider including the existing code points from information element 89 in the forwarding exception code to support migration path so that the device does not need to export both the information elements. We have addressed this in the draft by modifying section 4.2.1, the forwarding exception code, and change that to forwarding status code, and incorporated all the existing categories from information element 89. Next, there was a comment from Jeff asking if we can include a way to distinguish drops in the data pipeline in the IPFix packet. An IPFix packet may contain some additional information to classify which lookup failed in the internal pipeline. This internal classification may be useful for debugging. And the way we have addressed this in the draft by adding section 4.2.3, the forwarding lookup type, to stream the last lookup that is performed on the packet in the ingress path. Additionally, we saw the need to add a new information element to report an underlying ingress interface index, which represents the child member index of an aggregated Ethernet interface. In case of an aggregated Ethernet interface being an ingress interface, when a packet is being processed by that interface. And we took care of a few statements here and there as well. So with respect to next steps, so we are requesting some more review, feedback, and comments from the working group, and some working group adoption after the review. That's all I have. Any questions?
Questions? Since I don't recall seeing a lot of discussion on this. Hank, would you mind raising a poll with the working group members here to see, do people find this, is this work interesting? Is there a desire to work on this in the ops area working group? We've got some time, so I would be curious.
And this works context specific, yeah? This work.
Yes. Things seem to have slowed. So of the people who participated, there was some desire, overwhelming of the people who participated, think this is interesting work. We can certainly do a more formal call for adoption. Thanks. We still do have a few minutes if there are any questions on this draft. This is amazing. I really thought we would run out of time, and look at all you giving back so much time. I love it. Thank you. Generous crowd here in Yokohama. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Venkata. Next up, I think, Med, you're back. Yep. I think this is service attachments. I swear I'm clicking share. Okay, hold on. Sorry. Now it's on me. I'm the guy who's keeping us from moving forward. Let's try this again. There we go.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. So I will try to give back 5 minutes for Luis and Sheen. This is a question about the current and recent work we are doing about the attachment circuits, bearers, and SAPs. SAPs, stands for Service Attachment Points. Next slide, please. So this is a work that we are doing collectively with the, I would say, other people from vendors and operators to build on the various pieces that we have built here in the OPSAWG working group. One of them is the service attachment points. So just as a reminder, the service attachment points, this is what we specific network reference points that are facing the customers, and this is where the services are delivered to the customers, or where you are ready to deliver services to the customer. So a SAP, when you expose it to your, I would say, external EPS, does not mean that the service is actually put into effect or it is running or not. So we are not making any assumptions on the status of the service that are bound to the SAP. So this is really important from, I would say, operational standpoints, because otherwise we will be making some assumptions that will be hinder the way your modeling will be used. The SAPs are not specific to a given service by default or not. So it's up to you, to the operator, to decide whether you can build or you can associate a SAP for a given service, or you can multiplex multiple services over the same SAP. And the SAPs, they are connected to another, I would say, device or functions. That device, it can be, I would say, physical, or it can be logical. And that one can be a network function, can be an SBR, can be a CE, a CP, or a collet. So again, there is no assumptions on the other, I would say, component that terminates your SAPs in any other sites. And what we call the logical constraints that bind your SAP to the other device or components, this is what we call the attachment circuits. So we are abstracting that notion to something which is really logical, to, I would say, graft your SAPs to the customer device. So multiple, I would say, attachment circuits can be built or bound to the same SAP, And the same SAP, it can see multiple peer SAP. There is no one-to-one mapping between a SAP that is instantiated at the network side and the other one that can be in the customer side. So for example, if you are using, I would say, a broadcast domain, you can have one single SAP in your PE, for example, that can see in multiple CEs, and all of those are seen as being, I would say, connected through one single attachment circuit. So again, this is important in terms of the modeling, because otherwise we will hinder the way, I would say, the models are being used. And the same way, you can have multiple attachment circuits under the same SAPs. We are not making assumptions that each time you will connect your, I would say, PE or a given interface in your network to, I would say, an adjacent customer device, that you need or you must associate attachment circuits. Again, this is up to the operators. This is a guideline that are local to them, but at least in the model, we are not making these assumptions. And then there is this, I would say, this third notion. This is what we call the bearers. The bearers are really dummy there. This is the links, the physical connectivity that you have between the equipment. And we are trying to generalize the notion of the bearers to be what the required setup over which you can run your attachment circuits. So over the same bearer that you can, I would say, connect, for example, a cable or wireless connectivity and pick your favorite, you can run multiple attachment circuits over the same bearer. Next slide, please. So once we have set, I would say, this overall context, and we have the service attachment points, we have the attachment circuits, and then we have the bearers. Then there are some observations that we are seeing in various initiatives that are, I would say, nurturing here in the IETF. So the first one is that some of the data models that we are seeing, they are making some hidden or, not to say it, I would say politely, inaccurate assumptions about the attachment circuits, which are really problematic in terms of the deployment of this model. For example, some of them, they are just making, the attachment circuits, I just need a loopback of functions, and then I will provision my service. No, the reality is that this is more subtle than that. There's a lot of complexity there in some situation if you want to build your service and deliver to your customer. There are some other models that are trying to overload some of the recent concepts that we have defined here in the OPSAWG working group, and I see that there is a need there. So sorry for that need. So they are trying to reuse, I would say, the peer SAP ID as an identification of the logical construct. So the attachment circuits will be identified by the peer SAP ID, which is sometimes it will work, but in other situations this won't be, I would say, that's systematic. And the third problem there, which is, I would say, more important, is that there is a lack of consistency between the way we are modeling the attachment circuits. If you pick, for example, L2VPN, slicing, etc., every of these models, they are building their own, I would say, EC structure. Why we are manipulating the same object? So if you are presenting them in different way, there will be problems when it comes to mapping, I would say, this view into the actual configuration of the network. So we need really to have, I would say, a coherent view of the segments so that we will do the, I would say, the configuration, I would say, appropriately. So the deviation can be difficult. For example, I'm providing here the example of the slicing on purpose, because if you the slicing is just a service. And then when you, for example, plus a slice service, you need to, I would say, translate it into actual configuration of the network. And typically, this is done by L2VPN, and then some policies here and there, some traffic engineer that you can configure there. But at the end of the day, you need to map, I would say, your slice service into a VPN instance. Let it be L2 or L3. So there's a mapping to be done. And if we are saying to the people that are building the L2NM and the L2NM, you have to expose a mapping, I would say, function that will be specific to the service that we built over it. This is really, I would say, complexifying stuff. And we need to, I would say, to simplify as much as possible this interface that will translate the service view into the network view. So there are some sub-optimality. Again, this is a polite word to not say something else. And I would say the last, the other issue is that all these service models, including the ones that we edited here in the OPSAWG working group, in order to touch an attachment circuits, you have to have a VPN or a service instance. So touching the attachment circuits require having the service instance in place, which is not always, I would say, true in all the operations that we are aware of. in some of the operations, the teams that are managing the connectivity, the base connectivity between the Ps and the infrastructure, which is hosting, I would say, the network functions or the etc., are not the same. So we need to, there's a need to have, I would say, an interface to control the attachment circuits first, and then when you create your service, just to bind, I would say, the service to the attachment circuits. You don't need to create first the service instance before you start touching the attachment circuit itself. And the last one, this is related to the work we have done here with the SAP, is that the first scope that we set for the SAP, we wanted it to be a really very focused, so that can be usable. So we don't expose the glue between the SAPs and the attachment circuit it terminates. This is just the termination points, but we don't know what services they're terminating, what channels we are terminating to the customers, what setups we have from the SAP itself to the attachment circuit. So that glue is needed to be completed. And as you can see in the next slide, we have a proposal for the working group together with the group with whom we started to do this work. This is really, I would say, straightforward. If we want to have consistency and coherence among all the models that are touching attachment circuits, we need a library to be, I would say, available for them just to pick. If you need some of the types, yes, we have a reference. And so that is avoid that everyone will define his own objects, groupings, the types, and so on. So we are proposing this attachment circuit camel model, which is a sort of a library. And the second contribution, this is what we call the attachment circuit service. So if we want to expose the attachment circuit as a service, this is the way to go. And in this service model, we are trying to cover both operational models. The first one is if you want to, I would say, the integrated model, in which that I want to define my own service model, and I would like to control the attachment circuits that I am using inside that service model. Yes, you can do that, but please use the grouping that we are exposing to you, because we want to ensure a consistent view of the attachment circuits. That's fine. It's own decision of the service model. And the other ones, which is currently what we are recommending and favoring in the document, is this is what we call the separate provisioning. We are separating the provision of the service itself from the provisioning of the provisioning and the attachment circuits. And for that one, we are exposing references, attachment circuit references and the bearer's references. So in your service placement request, you just need to define your service, and then under a given hierarchy there, just to point to the reference that will be provided to you by the attachment service model. So this approach that is exposing the references to the bearers and to attachment circuits is really, I would say, optimal in the way that we are avoiding having redundant configuration, redundant node, etc., etc. And actually, we have another model which is for the bearer, but I'm not exposing here just for the sake of, I would say, simplicity. And the last contribution is to specify the network model for the attachment circuits. So this is the glue I was talking about in the previous slides, how we can connect the SAPs into the attachment circuits, so that we can have, I would say, the network view of the attachment circuits that are grafted at the SAP level themselves. Next slide, please. So we set a methodology for this work. Is to the first one is to adhere as much as possible to the what we produced here in the OPSAWG working group, the automation framework, so that we can ease the mapping between and the automated mapping between the service view into the network one and the network into the device model. We will use as much as possible the naming of the yet node, etc., so that the translation can be straightforward. The second one is to leverage on this table, I would say, specification we have so far. And the third aspect, which is important for this work, unlike what we have done for the VPN work, is that there are some specifics for the cloud, I would say, provisioning there. So we are challenging some of the way we are configuring the attachment circuits to make sure that we are taking into account some of the specifics of the cloud infrastructures. For example, the way the BGP stations are, I would say, maintained and so on. For example, in L2NM or LTSM, we are always assuming that there is one single BGP station, for example. while in the new design, we are not assuming that, because we of some of the specifics that we are aware of about the cloud infrastructure. Next slide, please.
Before we go to your uses, did you want to address Talo's question, or you want to wait till the end?
Till the end, it will
Okay.
be better. Yeah. This is I would say, some of the review which is shared with us with the people who are, I would say, doing some work in the ORAN. And by the way, I know that the recently IETF interest in this. They would like to reuse this, I would say, the slice service model, which is defined in the TS working group, and the various attachment circuit data models to, I would say, various segments, so that they can have something which is really modular, and they want that to be exposed to the 3GPP interfaces and so on. So this is really good for the IETF, that the people, they are trusting the work we are done here in the IETF, and I would say, the logic here is that there is no need that each SDO defines, I would say, its host model for the same devices, for the same, I would say, object that you are manipulating. Next slide, please. This is just a simple example to say that, yeah, we are not just covering the usual, I would say, use cases that we have done here in the IETF about the legacy VPNs. So this is a typical, I would say, deployment which is done, for example, if you want to graft, I would say, your P, for example, with a cloud infrastructure. Some famous, I would say, cloud operators, they can provide you a bearer there, a connection ID, and then magically you can create your attachment circuits. And we are showing how we can make this kind of, I would say, this kind of deployments. Next slide, please. This is just an overview of the current work status. So there is a lot of effort that has done so far to, I would say, to fix many of the issues that was reported. So this is really dynamic. We have, I would say, still some work in progress, but we are progressing really steadily and in a good shape. And then I trust that we will, I would say, have stable versions of the document soon. Next slide, please. So this is for the next step. So there are SDU that are waiting for this work, so that will be good that the IETF, I would say, show that they are hearing these voices. There is a room to I would say, ensure consistency of the work of the attachment circuits, and there is a group who is committed to work on this, a good energy on it. And the last point is that we commit, if this work is adopted here in the OPSAWG working group, to sync with the other working group, especially the TS working groups, so that they can sync how we glue the slice service itself with the attachment circuits. And that's my last comments.
Italo?
Yes, thank you. Italo Buzzi from Huawei. One comment and one question. The comment is, I think the grouping is very useful to do. So I strongly support to move forward on that. The comment is on the definition of AC and all as the ESA app. Do we really need all this concept? Because what is the difference between AC and the link from RFC 8345? It looks like a special type of link.
It's yeah. We can, I would say, in terms of terminology, we discussed this with the I would say with the authors. We can use some, I would say, even for the sub, you can see that we can just give it a termination points, and then we don't need to define new one. But we need, I would say, some specific items there to really focus on the specifics of this object. So that's why, for example, we went in the past for the service tab. For
Why
the
not
link,
augmenting RFC 8345 then? If you need more
yeah, the SAP is augmenting, by the way, that RFC. So that's another story. So the link is that the problem is that for the people in their minds, they think that the link is physical. So this is just in terms of mentality. If you want to set up a concept, this is one of the I would say motivation for that. And the other one is that we are trying to align with the concepts that are already existing for the services for the L2VPN and L2VPN, for examples. And then the notion of attachment circuit is really in place and massively used and implemented by, I would say, the vendors there. So that's to necessarily that we are not defining something which is new, but we are providing some, I would say, clarifications, because sometimes the attachment circuit is not what we think is an attachment circuit. So we need to do that exercise, and what is important is not the word that we put there, but the definition we put behind. So what really I invite you is to go to what we have there, and we receive some of the review of that part. So that is really important. And we are open to discuss the naming. So that's open for the working group if you want to change or use another term.
Rob Wilton, Cisco. So, I'm pleased to see this sort of thing happening. I think it's good to sort of evolve the YANG models and things like that. So it's sort of like a process question. Are you just hoping to define a new YANG model that's adding on or like augmenting existing ones? Was there any intention here to BIS the service level YANG models at all? It's just what's the scope of the work here?
Not yet. For this work, we won't focus it mainly on the attachment circuits. There may be, if the working group is interested in the future, is how we can leverage on this one, for example, to I would say the L2SM and the L2SM. But we are not. This is not covered in the current scope on purpose.
Because I think one sort of generic issue I see in terms of how YANG is being evolved in IETF versus say OpenConfig is they have a very much evolve it together quickly, and we have a much slower process of producing RFCs. But I think we need to somehow find a bridge between the two.
I fully agree with that.
Thank you, Med. There were two others in the queue, but I've asked to go to the list because we're over time. There's a comment from Adrian about overlap with T's. So I think we do need to have more discussion on the list about this work and where it belongs. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Bo, she knows the agenda. Yep, it is Bo, inventory model for enterprise networks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bo. I'm here to present this network inventory model on behalf of all the authors. This is not new draft. We presented this last time. So next slide, please. Why this network inventory is important? Here is some use cases for this network inventory model. The first is that in one domain, network management system may need these devices, hardware and software informations to doing some network management. For example, as like doing some network maintenance or when network has some problems, then you need to identify the specific hardware component or software components issues. The second is that like in some enterprise network, there may be several domains. One is network domains, but the other actually could have security domains or some performance monitoring domains. They separately collecting information from the network, but actually these efforts are quite redundant, like repeating the same message, but maybe representing in different system, different naming. So that's some issue we try to like fix, that we try to modeling the devices from hardware and software perspective in a more like consistent way. So next slide, please. When we're modeling this, we're trying to see what's existing work in IETF has been done. And what we found is that there are two other work quite relevant. One is in CCamp working group. They are trying to modeling device from hardware component perspective. And one in Ops AWG group, writing here, the name is Asset LMO Lifecycle Management. One piece of LMO draft is also modeling the network device from like the more general way, and also covering not only the hardware, software, but also the configuration and status of the devices. And our draft is mainly trying to cover the network device and also endpoint device and some physical link between these devices. So these are quite separate inventory definition. And on the right, that's something my understanding about the three different drafts working on. And you can see that the overlap part is that for the network device abstraction, like the first CCAM draft is only focused on the hardware piece, and asset draft cover more things and has like features, entitlement, and incident usage. And we working on is the network device from hardware and software pieces. So that's like some overlap we can see from this inventory modeling perspective. So next slide, please. So what we understand about this inventory is that we feel like some quite defining similar attributes, but using the different naming. So here's so I have some like questions to the working group. Like, should we define some generalized inventory component list, like some components grouping to be reused in different work draft? Or we can define some device attributes grouping. So in that way, like just like the hardware I think Jane just presented that platform manifest. Some attributes can also be reused in their draft. And the other issue is that whether we can model this inventory model based on 8345, because if we need some physical cable connection abstraction, that's something missing from just from the network model. So that's some issue that I think we still discussed between the authors of the three drafts. So next slide, please. And we think like the drafts are quite, although we have some overlaps, but they have some like complementary each other. So we like to, we think this is useful and asking working group adoption and solicit more review and comments. Thanks.
Alex, can you be sure to raise your hand on the tool so you come in the line? Thank you. Alex.
Yes, yeah, Alex Clem, FutureWay. So thank you. I think this is important work, but I have one comment. Actually, you mentioned this in the end, the manifest work earlier. It seems actually a good opportunity to really tie these together, because it would be bad to see two separate models essentially modeling the same thing. So I think if this can be merged, that would be great.
Yeah, I think so. Thanks for the comment.
Marisol?
Marisol Palmero, Francisco. I just want to make a note about the overlap, right? I will be presenting later for the MLMO, but we understand there is no overlap with inventory because we believe inventory remains in a different layer. And this is what is discussed as well in the side meeting this week. We have two side meetings yesterday, one meeting to come in still this week. And our objective with the MLMO is to decouple from the inventory discussions at the level of that physical layer or even application. We have another concept of services, but this remains, it should remain separately, probably in the same discussion of the side meeting, but separately from the inventory.
Yeah, I understand your concern on this. I actually discussed with some other like representatives from the meeting. But their concern is also that because we try to modeling the device from software pieces, but they are thinking that the license and feature is also need to be part of it too. When like identifying the like root cause of some like configuration course, then it may need some how that like what's a version of the software and what license it to use, then you can finally identify the root cause of the configuration. Yeah, that's something but I think we can like going offline to discuss.
right, we will keep it in the side meeting discussions.
Yes.
Hi, Olga Havel. I want to say just that I think as well that it's great that you used 8345 and that you used the full old four topology entities. Like one thing would be that I think there should be a kind of link between hardware assets and some assets, like some, you know, for the software and
Olga,
versioning and
can you
licensing.
get closer to the mic?
Having a common properties for systems devices, you know, with all of that, I think it's a great idea. I would only be careful about layering there and, for example, operational status at the link and things like that. Where does it belong? Like, you know, I understand you are talking about physical links here, probably user-defined links. In that case, like if you are looking at operational status of the link, is there an overlap between layer 2 operational status? So maybe those things could be clear in the draft, what you are meaning.
Okay, yeah, I can add more text on this.
Robert and Cisco. So just to sort of update the working group, there's been discussions on inventory Yang in on the inventory Yang list. So we have a set up a interest list to discuss these things. And also we've had meetings this week. There's been a couple of meetings. I went to one of them and didn't go to the second. And from that, there seemed to be quite a lot of different interest in different inventory Yang happening in different working groups and overlapping different places. Some of that work overlaps. So there's a desire to try and get that together and coordinate it and have a common base model and have different models to sort of augment into that. So I think the sort of direction from that side meeting is the proposal to set up a short focused working group to focus on solving this problem of actually just getting the right people in the room to solve the issue of how to get a common model, how do these things all fit together. So so that's what's going on. If people are interested in that, can you join the inventory-yang mailing list? And I think there might be another side meeting organized this week, but I'm sure you can ask somebody and they'll send you the details. So, but just to let you know what's happening. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, I was going to ask about the whole NIMBY thing that I saw. So thank you. Yes, please do join.
Diego Lopez, Telefónica. Well, it's very much connected with this. It's not only about aligning, or in my view, it's not only about aligning the different inventory efforts. I believe that we need to have a clear, to draw a clear line between what is inventory, what is not inventory, etc. Because if we assume that inventory is whatever has to do with any data that is related to network devices, then inventory is everything. And that's something that we have to be very careful. And we have to, probably it would be advisable that this group that Rob was mentioning initially takes a step back and tries to precisely define what we're talking about when we're talking about inventory and which is the relationship among the different things, because and for sure, the inventory is, yesterday discussing with Oscar, we were talking about the sources of trust or something like that, that is a root about the devices you have. And linking to that, and this is what we are, by the way, trying to do in the MLNO right now, is about say, well, yeah, somebody's taking care of the boxes, the cables, the things that we have, and link the life cycle or the whatever, the operational aspects, the root cause analysis, etc. So it's about taking a step back and trying to delimit what we're talking about when we're talking about inventory, because otherwise we're going to keep moving in extremely muddy waters on this.
I think that may be why that side meeting and that focus working group will be very important.
Okay, Hamian from Huawei. Yeah, thank you for this work and the harmonizing the work in the CCamp is very useful, and I think it's also useful to judge cover both the hardware and the software session. But one of my question would be, it may not be that clear on the boundary between the hardware and software, because sometimes we digitalize a lot on the hardware and it's shown on the software, for example, virtual machines, those kind of stuff. It can be viewed as an infrastructure, but it can also be a kind of software tool. So I'm not sure if we are going to need the definition or concept of such stuff, but this is just used for reference, may not be the final answer to the modeling.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Bo. Marisol, I believe you're next.
Marisol Palmero Francisco. Just put this one here. I'm here with Diego and Camilo as part of the authors for the MLMO, Data Model for Lifecycle Management and Operations. We are currently on version 9, and if you could bring next slide, we are currently on call for adoption. Basically on the background for the MLMO, and I think coming from the previous session, it's important to highlight where it has been discussions around inventory and what we were considering as part of this concept of asset. Initially, all the inventory discussions were more linked to hardware pieces, right? Hardware and even software that is running on that network element. But what we consider as part of this asset, we can look into other naming as well, or other way to define within the DMLMO, but it's the concept of that entity that might be running in the network in a form of a hardware or a software, an application, or even a service. And when we start looking into DMLMO is when we have been buying or choosing that specific asset and we place it into the network. We start using it. We need to entitle. We have been addressing this into our group to rename the license to entitlement. And we enable certain features, certain configuration that we start to use as well. And here is where the DMLMO on the lifecycle management starts, right? We have been considering as well incident management in there. We might be renaming it as there is another draft coming on the incident management with a different concept. But this is where basically the work of DMLMO stays. Once we have been defining this layer of inventory, how we use that inventory, right? And in the way that it is configured on that concept of capabilities for features and how it is used. Next slide, please. Basically, the changes from previous version, it was a good, nice IETF115, where we received a lot of feedback and we address things that were discussed in there. We have been renaming licenses to entitlement, and we believe is a more generic term. And we have been also reducing the LMO assets module, removing what we understand that might be considered as part of an inventory discussion. We have been extending the capability of assets just to do a reference to an inventory that we might be referring to, and with the capability to extend, right? If we need to consider any other attributes that might not be as part of that inventory. But this is, has been addressed with an example on the appendix in the DMLMO draft. Next slide. Examples to be done, and this is based on the different feedback that we have been receiving since the call for adoption was done. We will be including examples with visualization of the use cases. There are some confusions on terminology. You all made a couple of comments on the open source type of license. We will be addressing that. We will review again any based on the side meetings, any reference to inventory that we might still remain on the draft. We will be able, we will try to decouple that, making sure that we can continue with DMLMO. And there is this clarification probably on the incident management LMO class that we might need to include as well. As incident for us is any issue that might happen into a certain feature that is running in the network, and we need to raise that as an incident, right? As a ticket to the technical services in this case. And we will also work on the YAN structure. We understand we have not been doing that much work within the YAN structure until the modules are a bit more stabilized in the discussions. Next slide. Last but not least, considerations for the group, and where we are asking for your feedback and collaboration as well. We want to determine if entitlement is a good name for what we were considering before as license. The main modules, and we believe there is a value to keep them together for us, is this asset, entitlement, feature, and usage. There are other modules that initially were considered for future extension. We were including it in the LMO classes, but we can still separate it from the pure LMO, DMLMO initial document, and that could be the part of the incident management that we are referring to organization and users. And with that, open for questions.
Maybe time for one. Okay. Oh, it is on. This is still in call for adoption. I think it expires next week after we're back from Yokohama. Please do read it and provide feedback on list with respect to this. And as well, if anyone is interested in the inventory work, that is, as Rob pointed out, there's a list on that. Real quick, Diego.
Diego Lopez again. Just a comment on this regarding the adoption. Let me insist on one thing. We believe that this, independently of we're trying to decouple this from the inventory discussion, because we believe that the life cycle management, however we represent the substrate, is important. We have made an effort in precisely making this separation. So, well, personally, for sure, I believe that this has strong interest for the operations in general, independently of the outcome of the inventory, and we are trying to make this clear separation. Just I wanted to remark this because it's something that. Well, just the exercise that I was talking about, the stepping back and looking at the different items that we are dealing with. We want to deal with is something that we are trying to do, and what Marisol has summarized there.
And yes, as we talked in 115 about abstracting out that inventory, and you, as I said, as a contributor, I thought it was pleased that you did the work. So yes, please do read, working group, please do read and provide all feedback on list. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh man, my phone went to sleep. I think it's Alex. Yes, screen network metrics.
Yes, hello. So I'm Alex Clem. I'm presenting on green networking metrics on behalf of my co-authors. Next, please. So essentially, so the question for this draft is why green network metrics? So just as a brief recap, clearly basically reducing carbon footprint to net zero is one of the grand challenges of our days. This challenge also extends to network technology, and there's actually growing interest in this topic also here in IETF. So there has been recently the IAB workshop on environmental impact of internet application and systems, which took just place in December. And there are various drafts also that are starting to appear here. And for any of those activities, arguably visibility and instrumentation into carbon footprint, into energy usage and so forth in networks is an important building block from which to start, because how else can you assess how you're doing, and how would you enable other solutions that want to optimize and minimize those types of aspects? And this type of, having instrumentation starts with having the right metrics and things that need to be instrumented. And this is the purpose of this draft. We presented this draft actually briefly earlier in IETF 114. But I think basically it has evolved and matured since then. And we would like to ask basically also, well, ultimately basically to see if it can have a home here in OPSAWG. Next, please. So just as a brief recap of what's in the draft. So basically it defines a set of metrics in a space divided into 4 different aspects. The first and most obvious perhaps concerns the equipment and the device. So this basically is about attributing the footprint, carbon footprint to the root, basically, which is of course the devices that need to be powered. The focus of those metrics in this area are on energy consumption and energy utilization efficiency. There are, of course, other considerations beyond just how much power is consumed. Also, for instance, considerations for how to take energy sources into account, how you would adjust, for instance, the energy mix with which the network is being powered, to also relate how does power usage and carbon footprint, how do they relate and so forth. So there are couple of those considerations which are also described. Likewise, there are special considerations, for instance, in cases of virtualization. So, for instance, in case where you have VNFs and so forth, how would you attribute carbon footprint incurred there? Is it just all the hosting infrastructure, or do we need to have also notions of virtual energy, virtual carbon, virtual footprint? And so, some of the examples of what you will find basically are the different power consumption type of metrics on a per chassis, line card, port, etc. Stuff that will go into data sheets, as well as various sustainability ratings and factors. Next. So beyond the equipment, there are a couple of other aspects. One, basically flows. Basically, this is the attempt to relate carbon footprint to flows and service instances. Typically, this will be a function of the volume and duration of traffic on a flow. But there are a few additional considerations that need to be taken into account. For instance, what's the replication, what's the amount of loss that you're incurring, etc. Applications for this are also include carbon-based accounting. And so, again, some of the examples would be that you would want to assess what is the carbon footprint that is generated, for instance, over the duration of a flow. Third one concerns paths. So basically, there's also a whole sub-discipline, if you will, emerging concerning energy, carbon, and pollution-aware networking. You'll find also many papers in that area. And this basically concerns about how you would assess the carbon intensity of paths and route alternatives and optimize your network for those things. And then finally, of course, there are metrics for the network at large. That's, I mean, at the end of the day, you want to optimize a thing for the totality of things. Next, please. So in addition to those basic metrics, there are a number of additional considerations, some of which I already mentioned, and the draft actually spends considerable time on those. Concerning, well, one thing concerns how you relate energy consumption and carbon footprint. So obviously, energy consumption is one thing, but you can also account for energy sources, etc. Apply certain conversion formulas, etc. You also need to account for other stuff, for instance, for your heating, ventilation, air conditioning, etc. For hidden devices, it may not be, that may not be instrumented, but that you need to take into account for the holistic picture as well, and that which constitute a tax, if you will, and so forth. Then there are other aspects, such as, for instance, the inherent carbon in the, well, basically that's incorporated into the device itself due to its manufacturing, its sustainability, and so forth. And basically all of those basically are additional factors that can be defined in addition to the pure metrics, if you will, themselves. Another aspect concerns certification. So how do you know that these things are correct, that the information is reliable? And clearly, basically, if you give the wrong data, you can basically optimize for the wrong thing. So there's also security implications there and actually need for certification. And then finally, also how you deal with imprecision and uncertainty. So for instance, in pollution-aware networking, often the preference is to specify ranges and bands, if you will, as opposed to absolute values. Next one. So this is the last slide. So basically, yeah, so there have been a number of changes, as mentioned, since this was last presented here. Author who's joining, Yves Schooler. The plan next is actually, the next revision is we want to tighten up the distinction between primary metrics and derived metrics, based on this, which are basically taking into account, well, which are based on primary function, but then taking certain formulas, other factors into account, are discounted and so forth. So we want to basically keep those really actually better separate, and make a few additional edits. Something which will not be in this draft is concerns, for instance, the definition of young data models or IPFIX information elements. Those things will be important, but we believe that this would constitute follow-on work. And as mentioned, we are looking for this group here as a landing spot. And that concludes my pitch.
Jean.
Yes, I just have one minor point about the security. In a previous life, I was working on the smart grid and things like that. And one of the issues that we had was that if you publish the consumption like in real time, you can deduce a lot of things about the usages. So probably that's not really true for a router in a data center, but maybe for a CE, you might have some things like you could deduce whether the person is at home or not. So there might be some security consideration here.
That is true. That's absolutely correct. And those are this needs to be. I think actually this particular aspect is actually addressed in the security considerations. But yeah, clearly there are implications.
So Rob Walton, Cisco. So the IB held a workshop on energy usage in networks and things like that, and making green networking. And I think that was really good and useful. And I think it's good for IETF to be looking at this. But one of the sort of observations when I was attending those was it's hard to sort of pick out the things that where people have great ideas and things that have like a practical benefit and are useful. And I see that metrics is one sort of obvious thing that yes, getting the information off the device seems to be a reasonably good sort of first step to doing something rather than other ideas that might not have any real value. So basically, I'm supportive of doing this work somewhere. Maybe opposite AGB might be the right spot or somewhere else or something, I don't know. But in terms of doing this work, I think that this is useful work.
Thank you.
On that note, Hank, would you mind, we have a minute, poll. Do people want to work on this in OPSAWG? Raise of hand. It's a poll. Raise your hand if you want to, if you think this is the right place to work on this work. I assume that's going to come up shortly. I'm hoping.
The raise hand tool is a tool.
Yeah. There you go. There you go. Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you think OPSAWG is the right place to work on this. A lot of participants this time around compared to the previous one. Maybe it wasn't as clear last time. There seemed to be of the people participating, there seems to be a considerable amount who think this might be the right place. It is worth bringing up on the list. I myself have a number of questions I'm going to bring up into like who watches the watchers and how expensive is this to watch? But thank you.
Thanks.
Just one further question. So just to clarify, I wasn't saying not to do it here. It may be that this turns into a broader area and someone spins up a working group. So that was what I was thinking. I certainly see it's fine for this to be the home for this draft or in the short term before that sort of might happen.
Marisol, if you could take your question to the list. We're gonna move on to Torlis, last of the regular participants. Or regular presenters.
Oh, I have to dismiss it. Sorry, yeah. Shoo. And done.
Oh, is that the size that we're seeing here as a? No, no, come on. That can't be.
Maybe next slide.
Well, okay, next, okay.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Problem solved.
All right. So, thanks. So this is not about new technical work, but this is about a document that we authors tentatively called IETF and Energy and Overview. And we first presented it in IETF114 with a target for individual submission, but then we also got feedback that there could well be interest to bring this to OPSAWG and do this as a working group item. This was also presented at the IAB workshop about sustainability, and I think served well for others to read there as background for new work that they want to do, and that's pretty much also the goal. By the way, if you're interested to learn more about the IAB workshop, go to IAB Open on Thursday, I think it is, and Yari is going to present the summary report about the workshop that happened in last November, December, I think was. Right, so this document, we want to provide background references for the different items that we think the IETF has done over its time to help anybody who wants to learn, but also to provide background and references for the ones who want to do new work, like the metric stuff that Alex was presenting and other work, so that there is foundation on that. And while writing that up, we figured that there's really a large set of areas from very high level to really very detailed, even drafts that were adopted at the end of that document. Next slide. So, when you started to think about what has the IETF done for energy, it's kind of nothing that you would find immediately from the old word explicitly with the label energy. It's more like that a lot of the work the IETF has done had an impact on energy consumption of a lot of workflows, right? And that's the high level stuff that we started with. So the more then you recognize the scheme by which to look at IETF work, the more it becomes clear how to vet its impact on energy and sustainability. So now there are a lot more slides here, and obviously too much for 5 minutes, so most of it's for reference, but let's at least check the next slide here. So the very high level, I think, is that the internet at large has really caused and started the biggest wave of digitization of workflows that previously, were all done without, digital mechanisms, a lot of it involving transportation, which is, as we all know, very energy heavy. So everything starting from email and going through a lot of other applications found to that. But then also the internet as a merging network of a lot of different network technologies has achieved a lot of energy consumption, even in the digital space, just through the benefits of scale in its architecture that was always, based on being very efficient. Next slide. Right, and so this is where it goes down into more and more of the details. So I think the telecollaboration, starting with very simple things like email, up to maybe in the next few years happening with holographic representation of us all virtually sitting here, right? So I think we all know that large range of things that happened over the time to enable this collaboration. Obviously, we had more or less good examples and still working on how to best do that ourselves with the hybrid IETFs. So I think that's another big example where we set the standards, where we defined the networks. Next slide. Yeah, so there obviously a lot of working groups in low power lossy networks. So that's hopefully well captured and summarized. Next slide. And then very specific technologies that we also felt to be worthwhile mentioning as something that has a big impact on energy. And then also, of course, the use of internet IETF technologies within power networks themselves, synchrophasor networks. For example, the smart grid. Next slide. Still got 50 seconds from you with the next slide.
I'm not doing the next slide.
Oh, he's doing the next slide. Okay, right. So yeah, let's cut to the chase. So basically, let us know what you feel about interest in this work being done through the OPSAWG working group, whether you're supportive of it, and obviously always looking for collaborators to finish that document. Either way, however, it's going to proceed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Torlis. Marisol reminded us that there is a side meeting on Thursday around energy, around environmental impact, net zero, read out of the workshops that happened in December. So if you're interested in that, there is that on Thursday. And I think we will be having some discussions around green and energy impact, at least initially on Ops AWG. Michael Richardson pointed out that we may be a little bit overtaxed in terms of the amount of work happening in Ops AWG right now, but solving real problems is always of interest. So thank you. Apologies to Chi Fang, Luis, and Chong. We will not get to your session. However, I will encourage the working group to read up on the policy-based ACL, the Yang data model and network diagnosis for OAM tests, and the new incident management drafts that have recently come out. Provide that feedback on list, and in 117, we might have time for more sessions. With that, that concludes Ops AWG. I would like to hand it over to Rob Wilton and our virtual co-AD Warren for the Ops area portion of your program. I will be continuing to run the slides, apparently. I think I don't actually see Benoit's slides here.
So hello, while Joe tries to sort out slides and things, yes, I just want to cover the ops area part of this. So unfortunately, Warren can't make it in person. He had COVID earlier this week, and so he's separating. Pleased to see that Warren's been reselected as Ops AD for another 2 years, so that's great. Woohoo, go Warren. And then we've got sort of one presentation lined up today, if we can get it sorted, hopefully. You ready? So is it Benoit or is it Olga? Benoit's coming up. I think we're getting there. And then we'll have an open mic session at the end in case there's any questions.
So while you're getting the slide, maybe I could start with an intro.
Yes, that's fine. Yeah.
So hello, I'm Benoit, and I want to present something that we've been doing about digital map. So basically, based on the feedback from operators, we've been looking at how different Yang models fits together, and we want to share the experience that we've been gaining in our team by doing this POC.
Come on, man. Give me a little bit more than that.
Hello, my name is Benoit, and I would like to present. So actually, what we want to do is that we've been looking at the topology Yang modules and starting from the bottom to the top. So whenever we had a presentation by Met about SAP and circuit, they're going at a higher level. You know, in the IETF, we need to see if all these modules about Yang topology work together. And somehow, if you look, you will see that we've got many Yang modules. Enough time?
Yep.
Hello, my name is Benoit.
Thank you.
So thanks, Joe. So modeling digital map based on that RFC, and it's a base model for a topology. And we want to share experience. And I think this is why this is in the ops area and not ops area BG. So on the next slides. Yes. So we could be thinking that we've got many Yang modules already, right? Specifically about topology. And I'm listing a couple of them, right? The first one is the one in the title, a Yang data model for network topologies. But you've got L2, L3, NTEs, etc. So in the end, we could be thinking the work is done, right? Now, on the next slide, what we see on the next slide is if we look in the catalog, you will see many Yang modules that are augmenting this base model, right? And with many different technologies. So if we go to the next slide, we would see the list of all these RFCs. And we see that we have like L2, L3, DC fabric, network topology, T topology. Great. Now, if you go to the next slide, again in the catalog, you will see that if we look at the latest approved, which are the drafts that are being worked on in the IETF, augmenting this topology model, we've got many. And you could see at all the different technologies there, right? Service, OTN, service OAM, network slicing, etc. And I highlighted one which is even the BBF augmenting this YANG module with some geolocation information, which is again pretty useful, right? So next slide. So this talk covers, do those YANG modules work together, which is a kind of recurring question we've been having in the IETF. So we don't want to boil the ocean and look at all device models, but let's look at all the ones that are topology related. And Rob, you mentioned before the package, right? If we conclude that some of these work together, they could be advertised as a package. Now, the question we ask is, can those YANG modules be useful to create a digital map? And I'm going to share a relationship with digital twin as well. So the idea is simply to share experience, to share the open issues, to share the guidelines that we might have for the people augmenting the YANG modules. And in the end, ask the question, what do we actually require for a digital map? On the next slide. So I want to do all the definition things that are done in MRG, but if you think high level, the digital twin, it's a vision, but also a marketing term. It's a replica of the network that you could play with what-if scenarios offline, right? To do that, you need a basic model and a virtual instance of the topological information in the network. And to do that, you need a model. So we focus on the modeling part of this digital map. Okay, on the next slide. This map provides a multi-layer approach on physical, L2, L3, service, attachment circuit. It's a multi-layer. And this takes into account the core topology entities, the role in the network, the core properties, the relationship. And that's the one that correlates all of the digital twin data to the topological entities in the different layers of the network, right? On the next slide. This is what we did in our team with Olga being there, leading this effort. So basically, she's been looking at 2 different labs, at 2 different vendors, and trying to see how the first basic models fits together based on the entities, the components that are in the base model. So we've got the IETF network, the node, TP, termination point, and the links, starting from the devices, the links, L2, then going into the IGP, OSPF, ISIS, going even in the L3 VPN. So that's what we've been doing. Now on the next slide. What did I forget? Yeah, we look at tunnel, MPLS LDP, MPLS TE, and SRv6. And we're looking how they fit together. And we've been presenting this to some operators to see if this is useful to them, and specifically those operators who've been playing in the same area, and we compare nodes. So on the next slide. Based on the discussion, we actually ask ourselves, what do we need for this map? And a couple of requirements is we need the basic model with network node interface layers. They said yes. And on the right-hand side, I've said yes, if we take it 8345 as a reference, it works. The layer approach, they said yes. Up to the customer, because the customer intent and the service, right? Because in the end, that's what we want to have. Open programmable, they said yes, obviously. Standards, yes, obviously. And by the way, on programmable, I mean that in the future, we want to have the ability to write into this map, let's say for the what-if scenarios in the twin, all right? Must be cross-domain, yes. Then there are some more requirements, and some of them are not completely fulfilled. The semantic for layered network topologies. Sometimes it's not very clear, right? Relationship, it's not always clear and it's partial, and sometimes we might want to have relationship between different object types, right? It must be extensible with metadata. Like, okay, let's assume I want to have more information in my map. And exactly like Diego mentioned, for the inventory, we want to make sure that we know what is inventory and want to make sure what is digital map. But what is pluggable is like the inventory, which was discussed at length. And Joe, you had a point like about a sysname, right? You know, you've got like the sysname, you've got the management IP address, you've got the UUID in inventory. And basically, if you've got this map, we want to have a metadata, a pointer telling, if you go in that world of inventory, the UUID is blah. If you go in that world of management IP address is blah. And maybe node ID, hopefully, ideally it will be the same, right? But we know how it works. So that's what we meant by pluggable with functional modules. And we realize that not everything is Yang. So, you know, there are different worlds like flows and things like this. So if you want to plug those information in there, and I don't want to say this is part of the core digital map, but it's part of the functional modules that would be using the map. All right, next slide. Doing good in time?
You're fine, Tom.
Okay. Now, what have we been observing specifically on this RFCT 345? Well, a simple thing. We don't have bidirectional links in the map. Do we need that? Well, the answer is it depends. For which use case, right? Because we've got internal customers of this map with different views of the map, right? If you look at capacity planning, do we need that? Yes or no? If we look at up to the service level, yes or no? Multi-point, we just have point-to-point right now. Again, if we look higher in the service, do you need a definition of hub and spoke, right? Or full mesh? So we need to have more network-related semantic information. I could go in more details, right? But we're going to write a draft about that. But the relationship properties, the notion of layer and sublayer, the notion of assumption that we do whenever we have a map telling we assume there is connectivity, well, maybe no, because maybe there is a policy, there is an access list that's going to prevent for a certain prefix to have access. So again, what do we want from the map? For which use case? The people doing capacity planning have a different requirement, people telling, I want to have connectivity. So okay, let me stop here. I want to say guideline as well. So we start to arrive with some guidelines on how to augment and how to make it useful. Next slide. High level observation. Again, some more open issues, some more guidelines. You know, just to mention one of them, I don't want to go into all the details here, but BGP could be used for underlay and overlay, right? We have to see how we fit that. It needs to connect to also different points. So this notion of, you know, what is L2? It seems like a very simple question, but we've been discussing what we want to have into the L2 view. So all of these means that we are coming up with a POC, with some guidelines, with requirements on digital map. And on the next slide, which should be last. So we'll continue our POC. We will keep evaluating the different technologies that we add to the to the map itself. What we want to connect in the end is up to what Matt was mentioning, right? The SAP is key for us because we want to go into the service. On top of that, the attachment circuit. So in the end, we want to have, I don't want to say everything, right? But we want to be able to extend this to be useful. And how to fulfill the digital map requirements, because we could be boarding the ocean and have everything in there, including the entire inventory. It's not the point. So we're focusing simply on the core digital map that we could augment. So we plan to request, I mean, to have people working in this area, discussing with us, discussing together. So engage interesting parties. We might have side meetings in the future, and what we want to do is report this to the IETF in the future. And I'll finish here.
Any questions? So we have time for questions, is there any?
Hi, this is Henk, as a contributor, so to speak. some 8 or 10 years ago, we were building digital twins and we didn't know that they were digital twins, and there were maps and there were ontologies and there were billions of data points in there. And we did realize that hub to spoke then is a standby for direct things that spawn, and you have primaries and secondaries and all these semantics and relationships nest. So layer 2 appears in layer 3, which can again appear, you can nest. And so nested interfaces, all these relationship and semantics have been defined at some point already. And they would, have to be unearthed somehow and put together for your proposals here. I think that's a nice thing to do. But there's a lot of things out there that should you should not conflict with. And have to document what's already there.
Good points.
But otherwise, I think this is interesting. So thank you for bringing it here. I think it's good to sort of present this and sort of show how these technologies are being used and what the problems are with them and how those can be solved. So I think that's great. So yes, thank you. So I think that leaves a sort of a 5-minute slot for open mic. Again, sorry that Warren can't be here to take the questions, because normally I like to field all the questions to him. So if there are any questions to me or questions to Warren you'd like me to proxy through to him. He's virtual. He could respond, yeah. I don't know if there's anyone in the mic line. Doesn't seem anyone standing up. And otherwise, if you want to try and catch us at some time, then drop us an email or find us on the corridors, and I'm sure we'll be happy to chat. But if not, going once, going twice, I think we're done. So thank you all for attending today. Thank you for organising, Cherry. Sorry, I'm going to.
Thank you.